Parker. I am an ASCAC member as well. I've become affiliated with AHSA about three to 4 years ago, I think. I live in Philadelphia. I teach high school math, but my students always say that based on the conversations we ended up having in class that I should have been an African American history teacher. And I'm glad they say that, because that means they're paying attention, because my concept of mathematics is that mathematics is really, more than anything, a tool to develop problem solving skills and a tool to develop critical thinking. And we should be able to use that critical thinking to solve our problems that are cultural and that are of a socio-political and socio-economic nature. I've been teaching for 13 years in Philadelphia, different charter schools, also in the public school system. And I'm the father of 2 children. I have a 12-year-old son named Nasim, a 5-year-old daughter named Nasada, named after Asada Shakur. And a lot of my work with education comes from, I'm motivated by them. And also, like to speak to your point, in my years of teaching, I believe that while we do have to provide for the students that are in these Eurocentric schools, the ultimate goal must be independent African-centered institutions. That's got to be the ultimate goal at some point anyway, which ties into my presentation on, the title of my presentation is Thomas Sankara, an Upright African Leader. Here are 2 books of Thomas Sankara's speeches, We Are Heirs to the World's Revolutions, and also Thomas Sankara Speaks, the Burkina Faso Revolution, because Thomas Sankara was a Pan-Africanist, and Thomas Sankara was concerned with gaining independence for not only his people in, which previously called Upper Volta, but then renamed Burkina Faso, the land of the upright people, but also all Africans, not even just on the continent, but globally speaking. So what I'm going to do is, give a little background for my presentation, talk a little bit of giving a bridge biography of Thomas Sankara, and also talk about what I did is I kind of framed this in terms of kind of in hip hop, we talk about quotable hip hop lines, because this really is a presentation focused on the youth. Because I think Thomas Sankara is an exemplar, just like there are many exemplars that are obscure, that our youth need to know about. Because a lot of the mess that we're in is because of the mentorship and the exemplars that our youth have. Our youth are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They're doing what they've been trained to do. They're doing what they've been exposed to by the exemplars that they identify with because of who they've been given in the media and in the mainstream and what they see. So it is the job of us to give them some different exemplars, Thomas Sankara being one of them. So I'll just go into the presentation. So in the year 2017, Black youth require serious exemplars now more than ever. Physical conditions for some may not be as bad as they have been in previous years, but it is the belief that conditions have improved so drastically for us that is actually crippling us. I also contend that the youth, just as other age demographics believe, think and act in the manner they do because of these influences they have received from exposure to certain exemplars. In order for these triple evils of neocolonialism, monopoly capitalism, and global white supremacy to remain powerful and able to dictate our material existence, our enemies must expose as worthwhile those that align themselves with these evils and promote them in ways that make them seem appealing. So while conducting research on Thomas Sankara for this presentation, I examined his participation in the Non-Aligned Movement Summit, or Non-Aligned Summit in New Delhi, India, where he meets with Samora Machel and as well as Maurice Bishop before they were both assassinated. As all of these African men were assassinated during the 1980s, I started thinking to myself, well, what happened to the next generation of these type of revolutionaries from the 1990s that would have carried on this tradition? And I thought to myself, they must have got record deals. And I don't say that, from white corporate rap executives. I don't say that to be humorous, but I say this because the same spirit of aggression and manhood that these leaders embodied for the purpose of anti-colonial revolution is now applied to the maintenance of neocolonialism and counter-revolutionary action by African men that are given large platforms that these leaders once had. The rappers are now, it's similar to how the drum was, initially it was seen that it was outlawed on the plantation because of the power that the slaveholders understood that it held for us. It was outlawed, but now in the music that is not controlled by us and not distributed by us and not controlled economically by us, now it's harnessed and used to harm us. It's used against us. So a similar thing is taking place. The rappers are not the only guilty straw men, as many potential revolutionaries have entered into fields such as education, business, medicine, engineering, as well as other forms of entertainment such as sports. And instead we're working as counter-revolutionaries. So as I said earlier, we would benefit greatly from exposing our youth, especially those in impoverished urban areas, or the hoods, basically the hood, that are now being gentrified or as I like to say, settler recolonized, to figures like Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara, because of his similar cavalier spirit that many of the youth possess, but coupled with a revolutionary ideology. Our youth already have this cavalier spirit, but that potential energy is wasted on fulfilling the exploits of global white supremacy. Our youth need to have political awareness developed in order that they cease to waste this potential and use it instead to uplift our people and to nation build. Thomas Sankara is one such figure that can be lifted from obscurity and made a household name for our youth. As this happens, they would identify with him, his ideology and the goal of Pan-Africanism and our ultimate liberation. So like I said, I want to go into some quotes from some of his speeches. How much time do I have altogether? Altogether, what was it, 20 minutes altogether? How much have I taken already? Like what, 5? Just go ahead. Just go, okay. All right, we'll rock out. So yeah, some quotes, but before I get into that, I do want to talk about something that also plagues us, that we have to be very careful about when we're doing research and we're doing analysis. There these subtle manifestations of white supremacy, or we can call them microaggressions. I want to talk about something. It's often overlooked, and I think I see it as kind of sadistic actually. It involves European Marxism. In this particular case. So I'm gonna read a quote from the preface of this text. Thomas Sankara speaks. It's published by Pathfinder Press. They're Marxist leanings, and different people have different agendas, even if they seem like they're on your side. And we may have, there may be an interest convergence that goes on that Derek Bell talks about in his book, Silent Covenants, dealing with the Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, but we may not really be on the same side. We may be against the same thing, but not for the same thing. So on page 9 of the preface, it reads, quote, "This booklet by Thomas Sankara, the leader of Burkina Faso's popular revolutionary government from 1983 to 1987, was published by Pathfinder Press in French and then English some 3 years ago. It is a powerful new weapon in the hands of those fighting to advance along the road first charted in the Communist Manifesto more than 150 years ago by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels and their comrades." That's dangerous. That's dangerous, because we should ask some questions when we hear that, when we read that. Because, again, these are not the words of Thomas Sankara. These are the words of a publisher. Because the question we have to ask is, well, how was the road to a liberation first charted in the Communist Manifesto in 1848? So are you telling me African people weren't trying to get liberated before Karl Marx? We had to wait for Karl Marx and Frederick Engels to come along before we started, embracing these philosophies of socialism and, fair societies, and we shouldn't have just, all the wealth and the resources concentrated in the hands of the few when we weren't even living like that anyway. Alfred Hegel wrote that, the Africa was the dark continent and basically had to be discovered by Europeans in order for us to gain civilization. These editors seem to want to imply the same thing, that communal living practices that privilege the humanity of all members of the group over individual private property and private wealth hoarded by a few had to be provided to us by Europeans also, right? This is how Europeans attempt to absorb us into their movements and into their ideology. It's a subtle method of marginalization that we have to be aware of. This relates to how we negotiate positions with so-called white allies. There's a lot of conversation about that with movements like Black Lives Matter and whatnot, and allies and all those types of things. So we have to have a certain level of awareness, about these types of things. The youth also need to be able to consider the nuances of white supremacy and how it manifests itself in subtle ways, such as this. In the meantime, we have to be able to do serious analysis of anything we read, especially written by Europeans, that typically have different motives than we do as Africans. Thomas Sankara was carrying on the tradition of being an African. He wasn't carrying on the tradition of Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, right? That was something that they probably discovered in 1848 in Europe. That's something that our ancestors already were aware of and already were doing. Thomas Sankara is carrying on that tradition. So for them to try to isolate him when under that European project of them trying to realize their humanity, it's very problematic. It's very problematic. This work was not first charted by Karl Marx or any other European. This has to be addressed in this type of work, because when we give these types of presentations and we can't gloss over them, because we have to remember that often, just because we're against, as I said already, just because we're against the same thing, it don't mean we're for the same thing. All right, now that that's out the way, I want to give a little abridged biography of Sankara and also highlight the words of him that are of a particular relevance to the youth of today and the overall society that the global African community inhabits. December 21st, 1949, Thomas Sankara is born in the Yako township of Upper Volta, later renamed Burkina Faso. His father was an assistant policeman for the colonial administration. He later moved to Gal, which is near the Côte d'Ivoire border. Of course, Côte d'Ivoire is the nation south of Burkina Faso. He gained a high school education in Bobo Dioulasso. He then went to military school at Kadiogo Military School in Kambwanse, one of the few ways that Africans could, in that nation, that space, could receive higher education at the time. He then went to Madagascar. And I thought this was interesting because my children used to watch that movie Madagascar 2 and whatnot. And these are like connections, these are connections. So if we have, I think about this in terms of like pedagogy, like a lot of our young children, are exposed to movies like Madagascar. But, so I never thought in the past to make the connection between the Disney movie Madagascar and Thomas Sankara. But that's the connection right there, because our children already know the term. They're thinking about that word, thinking about that place. So that's a definite way to make that connection. But anyway, military training in Madagascar at Ansi Rabe Military Academy. And in 1969, that's where we went there. We went there in 1969. Workers and students had organized mass demonstrations there and strikes in 1972 that actually toppled the government. So Madagascar became independent in 1972. I thought about another connection with this. Thomas Sankara getting military training. I thought about Al Freeman. Al Freeman, the character from The Spook That Sat by the Door, written by Sam Greenlee. Also was a movie, a brother from Chicago. He's college educated, but then he goes and gets CIA training. But his goal, and he's playing the role of the good Negro. But his goal is to get the training and then take it back to the hood, take it back to the people, so that he can help the gang that he used to be part of when he was younger to spark revolution. Right? So that made me think about, Thomas Sankara used his military training not to be like a Colin Powell before his time, and just, be the, work in the military and help the United States government, drop bombs on Africa, but to do the work of liberating his people with that training. He later became a lieutenant in the Upper Volta Army, he also became prominent during a border conflict with Mali between the years 1974 and 1975.